By the way, I tricked Amelia yesterday with the like beef jerky chew, you know?
Dude, I have no idea what in the world you're talking about. Beef jerky shoe? You have shoes made of beef jerky?
No, beef jerky chew. It's like chewing tobacco, but it's beef jerky.
I'm quite
Have you
confident
never
that
had
my
this?
kids, dude. Yes, I just didn't know what that meant. I thought you said beef jerky chew. Now, also, side note, I don't think my kids know what chewing tobacco is.
Well, I had to explain it too. Yeah, mine didn't either.
Were they
I had
hanging
to
out
just
with
be-
like 90-year-old baseball players?
Well, but, I mean, I did have to explain, like, you know, and like move. I think the bad guy, Christopher, whatever his name is.
Walking.
No, I almost said that. For Back to the Future. Anyway, when he's on Dennis the Menace, you know, he's that like creepy homeless guy. I think he had it. And like cowboys and stuff. Anyway, I pulled the trick and I was like, I just feel like I just need to come clean with you. And she's like, what? What, Daddy, what? And I'm like, you know, guys like on the movies that do like chewing tobacco. And and then I had to like explain myself for another 5 minutes, explaining like what it was. And then I was like, I've kind of got into it and I really like it. And then I pulled it out of my, I started putting it in. She was like, but Dad, is that like cigarettes? You're just chewing them up.
Chewing up a cigarette? That's adorable.
Yeah, it was cute.
Now, speaking of baseball players who chew tobacco, I know you don't care about baseball, but this is pretty big news, dude.
Not a bit. Oh, the Japanese dude.
Yes, dude. He's one of my favorite players of all time. He's
that's
incredible, dude.
Yeah.
His name's Shohei Ohtani, and he just signed a deal for $700 million to go to the Dodgers.
The biggest of all time.
Which is an incredible reason. I'm so excited because now he's in the National League. That means they're going to play the Braves. I already know when those dates are. It's in September when they're going to be here in Atlanta. But dude, I looked at tickets in LA. Now that he's on there, I think like the opening day tickets are like $700 for like the crappiest seat. Because now that he's on there. But this is just another reason to love the Dodgers, which I do. In addition to the Braves are my favorite, but I've always liked the Dodgers. Freddie Freeman plays for the Dodgers now. And so now, he's the Atlanta's first baseman. You don't even know the name, but that's fine.
Nope.
Anyways, it's exciting because I've always loved the Japanese love for baseball. And, Beisaburo. And it's pretty cool because my plan, whenever we go to Japan, and I'm talking specifically about my family, but you're, of course, welcome to come too, is to visit some of these Japanese stadiums and, if possible, catch a game. If not, just, get some stuff like Osaka Tigers, man.
Is it Osaka? I thought it was like Onamitsu Tigers.
I think there's a bunch, man. They've got some, there's a bunch. Anyhow,
yeah, that's cool.
One of the things I love about our show, and part of the reason why I think collectively you and I both chose this to be something that we pull out of the vault, is I love these pre-internet mysteries that existed, in a time when there's just so much nostalgia wrapped up in it. There's a lot of, it was just a great time in our lives, everything from the movies and the music that were going on during that time. And this one, I think, man, has got to be, to me, so far, the king of these pre-internet mysteries, man.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's my favorite one that we've done, and I love it. So,
yeah, it's right up there with the Toynbee Tiles, the Mayday Mysteries. What are some of the Lake City Quiet Pills?
Lake City Quiet Pills. That one's kind of like my least favorite, just because gross, but
because it involves assassins.
Yeah, dude, come on. But and like child stuff. Mad Max, that one.
What? Oh, Mad Marcus.
I mean, Mad. No, not Mad. Well, that one's cool too. But no. I mean, not Mad Max.
Mad Max.
Max
Headroom.
Max Headroom, yeah. And the Soda Machine, the Mystery Machine.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That one's cool too.
Listen, I'm going to be honest, folks. The only reason we're bringing this up is that we had someone reach out to us by the name of Joseph Matheny, or at least we think it was him. Whenever we originally did the episode. And Joseph Matheny, for all intents and purposes, is the guy who...
The genius.
Absolute genius. Either created the hoax, quote unquote, slash,
Augmented reality.
augmented reality game, ARG, social experiment, if you will. Regardless, he's the guy that would be responsible for bringing it to the masses. And I'm praying that by having another show about this, I just want him on the show because he's, and here's the thing too. I think, like, I was born in 81. Woody was born in 74.
Stop it.
Oh, 80. And so Joseph would have been either one or two, like, sort of, like, not, I don't want to say generations.
Careful.
No, he's a little older. So he would have been like, and this is the era that I was so jealous of as a kid, you know?
They were able to enjoy the 80s, man.
Yeah, like being in high school in the 80s, or like, you know, being like, because we were like pretty young in the 80s, you know?
Yeah, babies.
Yeah, kind of babies. And so this was this generation or this era that, I don't know, they were really just doing stuff that was really cool and really interesting and kind of pushing the boundaries of like what you could do. I mean, the idea of like an augmented reality game, you know, back then, I mean, you have like sort of the Discordianism and that whole kind of tongue-in-cheek, like new religion kind of thing. You had a lot of that stuff, but I think with Ong's hat, he really revolutionized something. And like with creating this thing that was like, you know, there was no sort of wink and a nod to it. It was sort of carried out much like, you know, for our generation, seeing Blair Witch for the first time, like within those first few days that it came out, we had no idea that, you know, we were told this is completely true. This was all real. You know, these people were no longer with us. And I remember it added so much to that like experience, which was incredible.
And not too heavy on the top here, man.
No, I'm not. I'm singing your praises, Joseph. So if you're listening to the show and you don't make it all the way to the end, just think about coming on. We'd love to have you.
Let's dive in. You've been searching for us without knowing it. Following oblique references in crudely Xeroxed marginal Samzadat publications, crackpot mystical pamphlets, mail order courses, a paper trail and a coded series of rumors spread at street level, and the propagation of certain acts of insurrection against the planetary work machine in the consensus reality. Or perhaps through various obscure mammographed technical papers on the edges of chaos science, through pirate computer networks, or even through pure synchronicity in the pursuit of dreams. In any case, we know something about you, your interests, deeds and desires, works and days, and we know your address. Otherwise, you would not be reading this brochure.
Hey, all you Discordians and Syncro-Shamans. Welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Took a little pause there.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, is there a lot of like, what is that called?
Like dead air?
No, like, you mean you took a little pause?
No, well, I had to,
Here we go.
like, swallow, like, mid.
Mm-hmm. It happens every time in that exact spot, which is the best. No, but I didn't take a pause. I think there might be some latency.
Ooh.
I mean,
hey, can you tell us what latency is?
Yeah, sure. It's a delay in audio. No. Hey, man.
Hey, listeners, how we doing?
Happy May Day.
Here, you want to hit that again? I mean,
no. I'm just going to cut out all the shit that was just going on when we like took a long pause. And then it's just like, Happy May Day, brother.
Okay, perfect.
And that's when you would, of course, respond. I mean, like, this is going back.
I thought
this
you
is
were
like,
no.
What is it, the first episode we've ever done before? I got to tell you how to speak.
God, no. Because, man, how, like, just tense we were.
Oh, man. So bad.
Oh, it's hard to listen to. Yeah. No. I thought you were going to take it again. Like,
how about this,
from
man?
Happy May
No more
Day.
thinking. Okay. Just respond.
Okay.
Hey, man. Hey, sorry. Hey, brother. Happy May Day, brother. The other one, I'll use my other one. Just respond to the
You just said brother twice.
Brother.
Hey, brother. Happy May Day, brother. You sound like a friend of ours.
Just go ahead, man. Just pretend like I said it. All you got to do is respond. I've already got a good one in there. Okay.
I know, but just say it. Just say it. Just say it.
Hey, man. Happy May Day.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. May Day's... I can't do it.
Okay. Happy May Day, man.
Hey, happy May Day.
Now,
excited to be here.
For those of you that are new to the show, they might not know what May Day is or why we even talk about it. I'd like to take a second real quick to say, hey, there's something that you should probably go back and listen to. And for our seasoned vets that are listeners that show up every week after week, you might need a little touch, what's it called? A refresher. There you go. Go back and listen to Season 1, Episode 35, The May Day Mystery. Now,
every year... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Boy, got real serious. Every year. He's so excited.
I was just reading your mind.
Every year.
I was coming in strong.
Mm-hmm. For the benefit of kind of, wetting everybody's whistle, can you briefly explain to folks and remind them what the May Day Mystery kind of is? Just a little, nugget of synopsis so that we can kind of get them excited to go hear that previous episode.
Every year since at least 1981, a strange, cryptic ad can be found inside the pages of the Daily Wildcat, the University of Arizona student newspaper. On May 1st, 1981, a seemingly simple and mysterious photo, a combination of English letters and Chinese symbols, was published. The picture itself could have easily been overlooked or perhaps even ignored, and if that had been the only one of its kind, we'd wager it would have been. But that's not what happened. Every year since, on May 1st, a new ad can be found. More complex, more intricate, more mysterious, more strange, and thus the May Day Mystery was born. Mm-hmm. Who is spending the money to have these ads published? What does each strange mix of symbols, geographical coordinates, pictures, equations, quotes, and phrases mean? And what is the strange smiley face that is seemingly scribbled on each? Who is the orphanage, the group or individual who claim to be behind it all?
And today, listener, when you're listening to this episode, it's May 1st. And thus, we are celebrating May Day together. So we haven't had a chance at the time of recording this episode to see the newly released May Day, PDF at this point from, I guess, the orphanage, if they're still kicking.
They are.
Will be available. We'll put it in our Instagram stories, but we'll get the hard copy over to our patrons on our Patreon.
The frustrating thing about the May Day Mystery is it is so, especially these newer ones, it is so it really does get more elaborate, more complex, more of everything, Yeah. And so I remember we did this and we really went pretty hard in the paint on finding as much as we could out about it and really getting into it. And I remember being extremely excited because it was like, okay, it's going to come out today. And then it comes out and it's just like,
where do you begin?
I mean, I consider us pretty smart dudes, relatively speaking.
Half of us, yeah.
You're exactly right. Half of us. Hey, man, just because I rambled does not mean that
how did you know I was, you're assuming that you're the half that's not smart? I mean, that's a heck of an assumption, and it's one that I make.
No, but what I was saying before I was interrupted, as usual, is it's just, I think at this point, because, like I said, it's been going since 1981, or at least that they know of. It actually could have gone further back. And I think in our episode, we actually did discover that maybe 1979 there was something. I can't remember. But all that to say, I think now it's gone for so long that it's starting to incorporate like callbacks to previous releases or whatever.
Yeah.
Clues, yeah.
And I'm glad that you
and it
brought
gets
up
really
that
deep.
point, because that's actually not what our episode's about today. But even more exciting, or equally exciting, I should say, is today we're going to talk about one of the original gangsters.
Oh, yeah.
Of all pre-internet or even early internet mysteries ever. Okay? Today, we're going to talk about the Ong's Hat mystery.
Yes. This is one that we have literally talked about since season 1. No, we were talking about
This is when we were just like, hey, man, I think we should do a podcast.
Right. Exactly. It's one of those things that it is the sibling conspiracy to other ones that you may recognize: Cicada 3301, Lake City Quiet Pills, which we just did that episode, the Toynbee Tiles, and the Mayday Mystery. They're just that, it's that like, it sort of encompasses the early internet, pre-internet, that sort of like zine culture, and like, the idea of these sort of super genius folks, standing in a Kinko's printing out, tons of Xerox copies so they can plaster them all over their city or whatever. It's just all that stuff we love, that analog kind of stuff we love.
Yeah, like the old school grassroots. I mean, you can't forget about Grasshopper 4545.
What is
I'm just kidding, dude. Cicada 3 whatever. Okay.
No, which, by the way, we will be doing an episode on Cicada 3301 because it's also equally fascinating. But like you said, Ong's Hat is, I believe, it's the very first of its kind.
Has to be.
I think it predates all of these other ones because it did start out actually pre-internet and then sort of made its way into...
No, don't get too far, man. Let's just dive right in.
Okay, let's do it.
In the heart of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey lies a small ghost town called Ong's Hat. The town was abandoned in the early 20th century, but it has since become the center of a mysterious conspiracy theory that has captured the imagination of many. I mean, it's truly littered the forums ever since its inception. The Ong's Hat mystery revolves around a group of renegade scientists who allegedly discovered a way to travel to alternate realities. Now, according to the theory, the scientists set up a research facility in Ong's Hat where they conducted experiments to interdimensional travel. The story goes that these scientists were successful in their experiments and were able to travel to these realities where they discovered new technologies, knowledge that they brought back to our reality. However, the government allegedly became aware of this research and shut it down, forcing the scientists to go into hiding. Now, that is the very, very broad scope. But I want to give a little background, if that's okay, Tyler, because I think there's some context here that is going to kind of paint a little bit better of a picture of the time period, some more details about the scientists themselves. It's going to explain a lot about who these folks were. And it's going to sound funny at first. See, folks, I've got an admission here. This is not our first attempt at this episode. We previously recorded a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
The thing is, initially, whenever just like most of these things, whenever I agree to kind of okay, let's do this, I always kind of naively sort of don't have a great grasp on how much detail or how deep they go. And this one is so much deeper than I initially imagined. And Tyler, I think you can admit it. Far more detailed than you knew about too, right?
Oh, dude, 100%. I didn't know half of this stuff.
And so when I start out with this first piece of information, Tyler's immediately going to think, here we go again, because we literally spent and we're going to have that detailed version kind of as an expansion over on our Patreon.
Yeah, and that episode is going to be called Getting Granular with Woody.
Oh my gosh. It is, but it's just so fascinating is the problem.
And also, Getting Granular with Woody, that Patreon episode is literally Woody going through a catalog explaining the books.
Well, and okay, we'll get there, dude. I know that you've heard us talk about this a lot lately, and that's because over the past couple of months, we've had the amazing opportunity to really kind of just test in real time the stuff that has absolutely taken everything that we do to the next level on a daily basis. I just feel like there's just so much going on. I just sometimes don't know how I'm going to get it all done. That is until we started trying out this Magic Mind stuff. Because at the end of the day, look, it's almost February. 2024 is here, and before we know it, it's going to be gone. I'm sure you have plenty of goals and things that you want to achieve this year. So I'm so glad that I found Magic Mind, or really Magic Mind found us, because it changed the game. I was struggling to stay focused. My energy levels were kind of all over the place. Well, here comes Magic Mind, this little elixir that helped me stop procrastinating and put that extra pep in my step every single morning. Honestly, I take it because it's easy to incorporate into my routine. I don't have to go foraging for mushrooms and organic ingredients that are already inside Magic Mind. I can just drink it real quick and that's it. I mean, it's super easy. It's got amazing ingredients such as matcha, which is nature's extended release caffeine, Bacopa monnieri, a neurotropic that boosts memory, ashwagandha, and rhodiola rosea, which are adaptogens that reduce stress and anxiety. And who can forget lion's mane and cordyceps mushrooms that support cognition and energy levels. Here's the kicker. I recommend Magic Mind to anyone who wants to be at their best. Share it with your friends, your family, your fellow coffee addicts. I mean, it's a game changer. The good news for you, all of our That Would Be Rad listeners, is that they have hooked us up with an incredible discount opportunity for you. If you head over to magicmind.com/JanBRad, JanBRad, and join the community of go-getters, you can use our discount code BRAD20 to get a mind-blowing 56% off of your first subscription or 20% off of your one-time purchase. Again, our code will get you 56% off, and it only lasts until the end of the month. So, my friends, let's do this. Again, go to www.magicmind.com/JanBRad and take your life to the next level. All right, I need to take you back to around the 1950s.
Oh, geez.
You can see what I'm saying? All right.
The year 1450.
But for real, all this stuff kind of matters because it's so interesting in terms of the background of these scientists, the background of why these folks had interest in all this stuff. We're going to take it to the 1950s.
Well, hold on now. Now you're jumping way ahead. Let's start out with Jacob Ong's great-great-grandfather. Tell us that story.
Oh, okay. So you do want me to go into detail about?
Well, I do think you should briefly mention where the name. And
there's even the thing about this mystery is there's even plenty of
folklore
and mystery that surrounds the town of Ong's Hat.
Yeah.
Anyway, again, it's like this little bitty town that's located in this heavily wooded area, the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of history about why that town is, or that area is important in terms of national security, dating all the way back to World War II.
Yeah.
There's just all kinds of stuff that's kind of happened in this area.
And also, if the New Jersey Pine Barrens sound familiar, it's because that is the home of the Jersey Devil.
That's right, man.
One of the top 5 cryptids of all time, probably.
Of all time, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just this already mystique that surrounds this place, okay?
Yeah.
But around the 1950s, this group of white jazz musicians and poets who were formerly members of the Newark-founded Moorish Science Temple founded this thing called the Moorish Orthodox Church of America. The members of this small sort of sect traveled the world and learned a bunch of philosophies and spiritual practices from all different masters of the Eastern world. One of these guys is a guy named Wally Fard, and he traveled for years in India, Persia, and then kind of like lastly ended up in Afghanistan, where he, like again, throughout that time collected almost a bunch of like exotic initiations throughout all of this. All right, imagine this guy that's just on this spiritual journey.
Yeah,
he's practicing with like Hindu masters. He's practicing with some Islamic traditions. Yeah, like all of these different things, kind of boiling up now.
Which he would be kind of known as sort of like a Helena Blavatsky, or even some Aleister Crowley. It's that sort of like they would be considered like an adept. That's what they were commonly called.
They're these like highly intellectuals
Yeah.
who are also interested in the spiritual realm and trying to like make it all kind of like congeal into some sort of understanding.
Right.
Okay. Well, kind of anyway, maybe a little bit more than that. So in the late 70s, let's just say that Afghanistan was a little bit of a hot zone. Russia was kind of like, he needed to move back to the States. So he comes back. He'd made a fair amount of money along the way, and he purchases 200 acres in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. And this is around 1978, all right? Now, during this time, he'd also kind of almost collected a group of, runaways or whatever from different places. And they moved on this property and formed like a newer, even more sort of exclusive sect of that church. And they called it the Moorish Science Ashram.
And also, the Moorish science is sort of a play off, and actually it immediately made me think of Project Bluebeam, because it's this concept that Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, that they're all sort of reincarnated holy sort of avatars. And so it's like all those religions are sort of combined.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know. There's a book, I don't remember it. I know it's on my bookshelf downstairs somewhere, that in a sort of respectful way kind of illustrates the parallels between all of those important figures. But anyhow, Wally Fard publishes this series of Xeroxed newsletters that he called the Visionary Recitals, that kind of proclaim his beliefs, his thoughts, the whole thing, all right? People that are already sort of on the fringe and interested in this kind of stuff, who had read these words, started to kind of like flock to this area deep within these Pine Barrens. Among them were two young chaos scientists that were recently fired from Princeton on a charge of, quote, seditious nonsense. They were a brother and sister, and their names were Frank and Althea Dobbs.
I love it. And also, just to give some sort of, give you sort of a visual thing, it's super weird, because an ashram is like, you're going to see that in India, or it's sort of a spiritual, sort of monastery or
retreat,
or hermitage kind of thing. It's like it's where it's sort of like a retreat for like holy spiritual people.
Right, where they can practice their meditation, and their yoga and all this kind of stuff.
But it's weird to think about. There's that out in the middle of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey.
Right, and that there's enough people kind of flocking to this area based on these Xeroxed copies of, what was it called?
The
Visionary Recitals.
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, hold on just a quick second. It's interesting because, like, this is, again, like an illustration of, like, everyone has an audience. It doesn't matter how big or small it is. That audience, is going to be attracted to whatever that person is putting out there because of similar interests, right? And so that's kind of what's happening here.
Kind of like you guys listening to the podcast.
You guys found us, right? Anyway, so we're here. This is when we make the announcement. I think, should we go ahead and do it?
What are we doing?
We're starting a cult, and it's going to be okay.
But our ashram is going to be called the Ashrad. So
I like it.
I
like it. Okay, these Princeton scientists that were recently fired, the Dobbs twins, okay, had a very interesting and I think important, at least important to mention, childhood. Listen to this. These twins spent their early childhood in a UFO cult commune in rural Texas that was founded by their father. who was a retired, of course, insurance salesman who was murdered by rogue disciples during a revival in California.
Yeah.
So you could even say that these siblings had quite the head start in the world of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And the ashram's sort of, overall, not theme, but philosophy kind of suited them pretty well.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting thing about the Pine Barrens. Obviously, we've got the Jersey Devil, but it's often been called a perfect place for a UFO landing. So they settled into this old kind of Airstream camper trailer and constructed this like crude laboratory in a rebuilt barn hidden deep in the pines. This community really sort of began taking shape around these like strange and startling breakthroughs that were being made by the Dobbs twins during these years. And the Dobbs twins were also undergraduates of the University of Texas. And, well, that didn't tell you everything you need to know. Gigamaggies. Okay. These siblings, while they were undergrads, they started to produce like a series of these equations, which they really believed contained the seeds of a new science that they called cognitive chaos. Now, their dismissal from Princeton followed their attempt to submit these theorems as part of their PhD thesis. They were actually like submitting it as a joint thesis. And essentially, when they tried to do this, I think they essentially got just like laughed out of the room and sort of, you guys, for sure. What the heck, right? And basically, their theories promoted this idea that people could tap into the unused portion of their brains and do things such as like stop their aging, purge diseases from their systems.
Which is really fascinating because it's sort of showing, and I think you can't pick a better place with like being sort of a spiritual retreat at an ashram, because they're looking at all these things from this sort of science. I mean, granted, a lot of people still view it as like pseudoscience, but the sort of pseudoscientific side, whereas these sort of adepts and these sort of, spiritual, like Tibetan monks and stuff, they were kind of known for having these like powers. So I think that's a really interesting sort of parallel.
Right. For sure, man. And I mean, God, if I could use the unused port. Now, I'm not sure now, being a parent and stuff, I don't know how much unused portion I have left. But I'm sure there's some in there. And I would love to kind of like reverse the aging. That would be great. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
At the ashram, with this research that they were continuing, now that, they've set up their own lab, they're not at Princeton anymore. They don't have the constraints that, they were given there. They can basically do anything, right? They founded this thing called the Institute of Chaos Studies.
Which, my God, that sounds amazing.
Right? The advancements actually took place even faster than the researchers themselves had anticipated. In just 3 years, they discovered an incredible and peculiar device, which later became known as the Gate. It was actually a part of a series of devices called the Egg by the scientists. Here's what these things did, man. This is when it starts to buckle up, folks. So what they did was they connected individuals to computers and monitored their brain activity. And then through trials that involved things like sex, drugs, and other brainwave influencers, the researchers managed to manipulate the disorder they observed in the mind. They had a couple of different iterations of this egg that they tested. And the fourth one was tested on this runway. And the second that they activated this thing, both the subject, to the guy in it, and the device vanished. Only to reappear shortly after. Now, that time period was exactly 7 minutes.
Which is the number of completion in the Bible.
This, of course, provoked a moment of fear and panic. I mean, can you just imagine, man? I mean, I think it's easier for us to all imagine now because we've seen movies like Ant-Man or Endgame or whatever where they're like...
Inner space.
Yeah, they're Inner Space, which is a great movie.
That's a great movie.
Underrated.
Yeah.
I'm a big Martin Short fan. Okay, so they're just panicking. They're like, what in the world? Blah, blah, blah. For about 7 minutes, the entire ICS lost its collective cool, People were just like, oh my God. At that point, though, the egg reappeared with its passenger intact and beaming. The young man stated that he had journeyed to a dimension adjacent to ours, and thus the gateway had been opened. Now, interestingly enough, timing-wise, there was a chemical spill from Fort Dix, which caused nuclear material, and from what I've read, weapons-grade plutonium, actually, to leak into the area. And so the ICS members were forced to abandon their Pine Barren base. We'll talk about the timing of that in just a second, but instead of attempting to flee to another physical location, close by or anything like that, instead they chose to embark on an interdimensional journey, using this harnessed power of the gate to transport themselves and their belongings to a parallel dimension where they could continue to dwell in Ong's Hat. But here's what's important, but devoid of any human presence. You see, when that young man came back, he said that, he had journeyed to this other dimension. It was almost exact, except that there were no other humans. It was as if humans had never existed.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So they decided to kind of gather up all their stuff. Hey, we're taking everything, and we're just going to, one by one, just transport the lab, transport the people. We'll live there.
Yeah.
We know we can kind of come back and forth, and we'll just continue to, build stuff up there. If something goes wrong, well, we'll come back, and, if we need supplies.
Yeah.
And that's kind of basically, as the legend goes, what they decided to do.
I mean, that is the coolest part. I mean, the fact that, the idea that they were going back and forth between dimensions or, whatever.
Realities. Whatever.
Yeah, reality. Yeah. They're sort of piece by piece, bringing parts over and then going back. And that's just such a, I mean, I do have to say, for this time period, this is a really innovative idea.
Yeah.
This is not something that you would see in pop culture or...
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. Yeah. So here's kind of how the legend sort of stops. Legend has it that all these experiments, again, had sparked this attention by the government and even led to potentially a brutal and gruesome confrontation. Rumor has it that when the U.S. government became aware of these experiments, they ended up launching a raid on the compound, which resulted in the deaths of, several members. I think they actually said 7 of the group. Other people have suggested that the fatal attack was carried out by Delta Force itself. I mean, I don't know if Chuck Norris was leading the charge.
Stole it from me. I was right about to say that.
Or what. I mean, immediately, anytime I see the word Delta Force, it's just I see Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
When you're so bad at it, you don't even have to wear camouflage. You just wear jeans and cut off shirt. Yeah, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear the term Delta Force, usually people immediately sort of see the word. I immediately just see Chuck Norris.
Exactly. Yeah. Man, do you remember all those Chuck Norris jokes, man, from way back in the day?
They were pretty
Those
funny.
Were gold.
Yeah, they really were.
Pretty funny.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of Russians, what are you, you a commie, bro?
I'm not a commie. Or a Rusky.
Others believed, speaking of the Ruskies, that the Russian or even potentially Danish military was behind the violence. So there's rumor that other governments potentially caught wind of this technology. And if you think about it, boy, what a way to... I mean, think about it this way. I just thought of this. I mean, whatever. I don't want to take too much time on the show, bragging about,
Here we go.
being smart or anything. But Imagine if you were going to use this technology in a like strategic military way. You could go to this other reality, transport all kinds of weaponry, and bring like an egg. Now, again, I don't know how it all works, but I'm just saying, bring an egg with you to the equivalent of whatever your target is. Then you just appear, leave the, freaking, bomb or whatever, disappear into the other reality, travel safely. You know what I'm saying? Incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Here's something that's interesting, okay? Well, I'll say this. The reason we know all about this was a series of Xeroxed pamphlets that began to appear, kind of keying people into this mystery that made reference to a catalog that was found of a list of books that seemingly, in a cryptic way, laid all of this information out.
Right.
And kind of told the story. The idea is that within these findable books, pieces of nonfiction and even fiction, and some like hard to find manuscripts and, drafts and all these things, this company had basically collected all these things to kind of show, hey, when they're talking about this, see, this is what has happened. And they were using this literature to kind of spread the word, okay?
Yep.
The catalog itself was called the Incunabula. And again, it lists, like, hold on, we're not going to go into each one, dude, I promise.
We're saving that for the Patreon.
Yeah, it lists like 27 books, everything from parallel universes, quantum reality. It gets really deep. But within that catalog, it kind of has like little breakdowns of each book and why it's significant to this thing. Well, along with that catalog, pamphlets about the Ong's Hat mystery started to appear in people's mailboxes. Not only that, but this is around the beginning of the early stages of the internet, one of our favorite time periods, when the way that people were kind of experimenting with communicating with one another were what was on like message boards, right? And people would just kind of like leave this, leave that.
I mean, that, and you got to think, like, if you're, for our younger listeners, like, this is what the internet was. It was what we know is like what he said, message boards or like forums. It was basically kind of like how Reddit is now, but that was the extent of the whole internet.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's it, man. I mean, you would basically just like wait at the mailbox to get another like AOL trial disc CD-ROM, and then you would put it in and you'd be like, yes, I can finally use this. Like, and then it would take a full rounded 30 minutes before you could even get to this message board,
Yeah, exactly.
And all of that to basically find out just random information. But that was the beginning of it. And then they started to kind of like have like almost like subreddits, but subcategories where you could find people with like-minded interest. And so I think this is where like all these little like clues and things, a discussion began to open up about Ong's Hat and a potential gateway to other dimensions. Let's take a quick break, and then when we get back, let's talk about the guy that basically spearheaded the discovery of this and even like went into deep investigation of it into the late 80s and early 90s. His name was Joseph Matheny.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
from another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
Hey, you know what's a weird aspect of this that kind of feels weird to me is the fact that the Manhattan Project, where the sort of the historical sort of urban legend, if you will, even though we have tons of documents now, when the USS Eldridge, they were trying to make it invisible, but it sort of shifted into another reality. And then when it reappeared, some of the men died because they were sort of fused into the walls and stuff.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is I just looked into this, and this was created in 1943, and the head scientist was actually from Princeton. So it's weird that this same college would have kicked these two twins out, when they were sort of on the same kind of track,
It's interesting too, man. Princeton is pretty close by to Ong's Hat, that area. And apparently Ong's Hat was kind of like a hangout location. I just feel like there was a lot of connections between a lot of these really brilliant minds. I mean, that's the interesting thing, not to say that if you didn't go to Princeton or you didn't go to Harvard that, the other students at your university weren't all brilliant and stuff. I would just think that there's a large concentration of this type of person at Princeton, Right. And yeah, I mean, to think that they didn't all just kind of hang out and wax poetic on scientific stuff is just,
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because that is, as we move forward, you're going to see that there's a common theme, and that is these different groups and these different sort of, religions even, they're always made up of these sort of, I don't know, art, counterculture sort of art collectives. It's these artists, I think of sort of the Beat Generation. We're huge, Ginsberg and Kerouac, and it's those kind of people who just sort of sit around taking psychedelics and benzos, and like you said, it's sort of waxing poetic about, culture and society. But with these people, and again, I go back to that interesting idea of sort of a merge between your super genius, scientific based or minded folks with your, equally smart, sort of spiritual kind of heavy folks. So it's a cool idea,
Oh yeah, for sure, man. And on the Patreon, we'll kind of talk a little bit more in depth about the Institute of Chaos Science, because they actually, part of what they did while they were also doing these experiments and stuff was develop a quote unquote curriculum that they would practice, kind of trying to enhance consciousness and really just, it was heavy into the emotional and psychic activities, how to control them and how to use them, to their advantage and stuff.
Well, and another interesting thing is that, it's funny because if these twins were kicked out, and they had to go do their research and their, scientific sort of explorations elsewhere outside of, Princeton or whatever, it's funny because at this same time, I think it's 1972 or 73 when, the military and, they would start testing remote viewing.
Yeah.
Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. These guys were getting into that. And then by, I think, 1978, you had things such as Project Stargate, and it was a very well-known thing. So either they were aware of these things or they were kind of hitting those same kind of, they were coming to the sort of similar conclusions in their research, separately.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. They were definitely reading a lot of the same sort of source material that led them in that direction, for sure. It's kind of like if all your buddies just listen to the Rolling Stones,
right?
But they're also musicians. A lot of them are going to kind of sound the same,
right? Sort of like booze and
and then, we weren't really that cool.
Not at all.
And then everybody like made fun of us because we had skinny jeans and they wore skinny jeans. And it's like, oh, so you're, you know, but I'm,
Yeah,
you know
right.
what I mean? Because I don't like that guy because he's, you know, got a backpack.
Yeah.
And, you know, chain wallet. And
I got you heated up. I'm sorry about that.
But I mean, God almighty, man, these guys. And then like they, you know.
Dude.
What did I do to these guys? Okay, look, we need to stay on track here. We already got off track here. Okay. Let's talk about Joseph Matheny.
Okay.
All right, so Joseph Matheny, the reason why this guy is significant, well, there's various reasons. But first off, he's basically the one that kind of introduced this mystery to the world. Well, like before we do, man, I gotta kind of...
Don't give it away.
No. I want to read the end of...
You just want to read just a couple books out of the catalog.
No. So Joseph Matheny released this paper that was called Ong's Hat, Gateway to the Dimensions. All right, it's this full-color brochure, and it kind of explains everything from the background of all this, the history, the various characters involved, and all that. But what's interesting to me is really the last couple of paragraphs, man. And if you'll permit me, I just think it's interesting because it's essentially from this organization, the Institute of Chaos Sciences, and it's kind of like their final statement.
Okay. Yeah, dude, let's do it.
Okay. It says, the colonization of new worlds, even an infinity of them, can never act as a panacea for the ills of consensus reality, only as a palliative. We have always taken our diseases with us to each new frontier. Everywhere we go, we exterminate aborigines and battle with our weapons of law and order against the chaos of reality. But this time, we believe, the affair will go differently. Because this time the journey outward can only be made simultaneously with the journey inward. And because this bootstrap trick can only be attained by a consciousness which, to a significant degree, has overcome itself, liberated itself from self-sickness, and realized self. Not that we think ourselves saints or try to behave morally or imagine ourselves a super race absolved from good and evil. Simply, we like to consider ourselves awake when we're awake, sleeping when we sleep. We enjoy good health. We have learned that desire demands the other just as it demands the self. We see no end to growth while life lasts, no cessation of unfolding or continual outpouring of form from chaos. We're moving on, nomads or monads of the dimensions. Sometimes we feel almost satisfied. At other times, terrified. Meanwhile, our agents of chaos remain behind to set up an ICS course, distribute Moorish Orthodox literature, a major mask for our propaganda, to subvert and evade our enemies. We haven't spoken yet of our enemies. Indeed, there remains much we have not said. This text, disguised as a sort of New Age vacation brochure, must fall silent at this point. Satisfied that it has embedded within itself enough clues for its intended readers who are already halfway to Ong's Hat in any case. But not enough for those with little faith to follow. Chaos never died. And that's it. So, Joseph Matheny, okay, he's the guy that kind of like brought all this to light and began to, people started seeing this mystery kind of pop up. Oh, there's a gateway to another dimension. You know, it's like little pieces of information kind of scattered across various media platforms. You know, you've got the hand Xeroxed, you know, crude photocopy pamphlets that were being mailed out. And, you know, you could just go to your mailbox and chances are if you were interested in this kind of stuff, you open your mailbox and all of a sudden you had this pamphlet. So Joseph Matheny, when he was a little bit younger, I mean, this is just, you know, we often talk about serendipity or synchronicity. This is a section where, like, I really think he believes that that's kind of what led him to this. So he was living in this apartment in Santa Cruz, California, and he had a buddy a guy that he kind of referred to as Bob, basically. And Bob was like kind of one of those out there thinkers. He was super interesting to Joseph Matheny because it would be like, okay, you're hanging out with your buddy, having a drink after work or something. And all of a sudden, like, for the most part, people would be like, well, man, did you see the Braves last night? Or, hey, man, I'm like working on this, or yada, yada, yada. Bob would be the guy that was like talking about, metaphysics and quantum
entanglement,
reality, entanglements, and all this kind of thing. And in fact, at the time, he didn't really know it, but Bob later kind of talked about how he was a part of this project that created this thing called the Metaphase typewriter.
Right.
So the Metaphase typewriter, I'm not going to get as deep as I did for the Patreon on this, but it's a quantum uncertain text generator open for, well, that's even too scientific.
Well, no. Can I take this?
Yes.
So the Metaphase typewriter is sort of this continuation of, we keep talking about like chaos, like the Institute of Chaos. So basically the chaos theory, when it's applied to, things like physics and things like that, it's basically it's kind of known as like the science of surprises. And so it takes these things that are sort of unpredictable and nonlinear, unexpected, and, kind of it focuses on things that are sort of impossible to predict, like, turbulence, the weather, the stock market, brain states, yada, yada, yada. And like I said, in physics, it sort of carries over to, and it's described as being called fractal mathematics. And it's basically a way to see that even things in complete chaos will create patterns. It's really pretty fascinating. But so this Nick Herbert guy would go on to create this Metaphase typewriter with Richard Shoup of Xerox, who we all know who Xerox is. And it was known as a quantum-operated device, and originally its purpose was to communicate with disembodied spirits. Despite many tests, including an attempt to contact the spirit of Harry Houdini on the 100th anniversary of his death, the group reported no success with the device. So basically, it was this idea of, I guess, each key would sort of be like a random list of like words, or I can't remember exactly what it do you know?
It gets pretty it gets pretty in depth here. I mean, they would use like a Geiger counter to measure the and then they would kind of like document the intervals between the Geiger counter clicks, and it gets a little out there.
But it was just a continuation of other things like automatic writing.
Using newer technology.
Yeah, it just continued on.
Relative concept.
And what's interesting is, I mean, I'm not driving away from the dock yet, but no. This is important though. This is the same kind of continuation, and now we have things like the Randonautica app, and we'll get into this in a little while. But it's ways that you sort of go around like the natural flow. So like. Say you had...
Well, and to not make it sound so detrimental, to add a little chaos to an organized life. Look, I think everybody listening can kind of agree in some ways, some in more, extreme ways, and some in more or less extreme ways. We get into these patterns in life where there's this like definitive sort of structure to our day, to our schedule, to the things that we decide to do. The app, like what Tyler's talking about, is like kind of electively sort of sprinkling in some chaos into that, right? And causing you to do or go somewhere randomly, quote unquote, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I was looking into this, it kind of dates back to, I mean, probably earlier, but in 1956, this French guy named Guy Debord created this thing called the Derive, and it was basically a way to sort of test like natural behavior in urban society. So you say, instead of like us, if we went to a city, it was like, okay, well, we need to go from point A to point B, and there's going to be this natural flow where people naturally kind of go. You know what I mean? You're going to follow the roads. And so this drive idea was a way of sort of getting out of that flow, which means, like what he said, you're adding sort of chaos to it. And, like we said before, this was birthed out of this sort of artist collective called the Letterist International. And it was just a way of, synchronistically sort of breaking the norm of where the natural flow would be. And by doing that, then you start, like I said, with the Randonautica app, which we're going to get into fully on an episode later, but it's a way of doing that and then also being really aware of these synchronicities that you sort of encounter on your way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think too, like for some people, just a very quick example of how it's interesting because people are so different. Like some people, and again, I hope this doesn't come off as like a judgmental statement. Mm-hmm. I think when you use words like chaos, it implies
it sounds bad.
It implies like something bad or like, and so whenever I'm talking about it in terms of one person this and one person that, it sounds judgmental.
Right.
But I don't mean it to. So I'll give you a personal example. There are folks that kind of thrive with chaos.
Yep.
And there's others that don't. I don't thrive with structure.
I do too, actually.
I have almost no desire to add and sprinkle in. Like, I don't, like, it's going to take you to this place, already pissed. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I want to plan ahead. I want to get there, enjoy the experience. Right? That I've planned.
Yeah.
Even just like even a more basic example, I'm the guy that takes the interstate down to the vacation spot in Florida. My brother-in-law, who definitely thrives in chaos, and again, not judgmental, I just mean like, 3 dogs, kids running around, no, not me. He doesn't. He takes like the back roads, right?
Right.
And I'm, sometimes I do to kind of walk back my statement a little bit. Sometimes I do kind of envy that. Like, man, I wish I was like easygoing enough to kind of like want to take a slower route and at some point have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit because I'm, driving through a teeny town. Instead, I'm just like, let me get down that interstate, man.
Yeah.
And get to the place and then enjoy my experience.
Like I said, anyway, it's that point A to point B.
Exactly. I don't really necessarily want to start adding C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Right. I just want A to B. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and before we move on, a lot of this also, I'm sure these folks were into, there's this concept of like called chaos magic also. And, you start getting into, Aleister Crowley, Kenneth Grant, and even like into like H.P. Lovecraft. There's a lot of this sort of idea. I think probably most notably in the modern age is one of my favorite writers, Grant Morrison, who wrote a book called The Invisibles for DC, or Vertigo technically, but he described even this, so he was he practiced chaos magic. And so he was really big into like sigils, and sigils are, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And it is kind of sort of chaotic. So it's like you get rid of the vowels in your name, you sort of draw out the letters and sort of combine them. So if like, I don't know how to really do it without a visual, but he actually treated this book, The Invisibles, as what he called a hypersigil. And so it was this sort of like a little miniature version of like the bigger magic universe. So basically he viewed it as like, okay, whatever happens in the comic, it's almost like a voodoo doll. It's like whatever happens in the comic, whatever I write is going to create changes and sort of manifest these things in the real world, which is kind of awesome. And in doing so, the book kind of exploded, and it's really an interesting kind of thing. And a lot of sort of pop musicians and artists and stuff sort of flirt with this idea of like chaos magic. But I think, like we were saying before, with these twins and then having a lab in an ashram, chaos magic is sort of the spiritual version of chaos theory, which is sort of living in like physics and science.
Yeah, and nature and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, as you were saying that, like I started thinking, like there is actually a place that I enjoy sort of the quote-unquote chaotic nature of things, and that's in like creation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, like in terms of like music or art or, you know, even the podcast, for example.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't want to be reading from a script the whole time. I want the chaos to ensue. But you know, as we could see from the first time that we tried to record this episode, sometimes that doesn't, you know, go as we want it to. But let's get back to Joseph Matheny.
Well, real quick though, it's funny you say that because you and I actually have two completely different views of like preparation for this show. And I mean, we're kind of looking behind the curtain a little, but it's funny because with Woody, it's like planning and that's when he thrives.
Like, you know, like I have like an outline of the things that I want to make sure that we make a point of.
Me, on the other hand, I mean, I'll still do a ton of research. You know, if it's no, I will do a ton of research.
I think what we've uncovered here is Woody does a ton of work, and Tyler shows up.
That is not true. But and you can ask Woody this,
no work at all. Did I answer it?
No, that is not true. He'll call and he'll be like, okay, so I think the outline should be kind of like this. And he'll start he'll get into like saying what he's going to say. And I know that if I do that, then I'm going to totally f*** up when it comes to showtime. So like for me, the best thing is like staying out of that. And that's probably why I ramble so much.
Well, and also like not to bring it back to the musical thing, but I think that we also approach even just like in a way like playing in the same way. Like we were both like very adamant about like rehearsal and that kind of thing because we wanted to also, I mean, we understand the concept of like you're putting on a show, you're creating an experience for an audience, but like I was so, it's the same thing. Did we already talk about this? Like how I am, there's people that just get up and say, you know, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow. And then there's folks like myself who are like, you know, no, I'm following a training plan.
Right.
It's already mapped out for me. So I don't have to like use that piece of my already busy brain and like it's already planned.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so like I kind of approached in a way the rehearsal part of like music that way. Whereas like you could just like pick up the guitar and you can like noodle through if you wanted to. And then, you know, you'd be good to go.
Yeah.
Me, like that sounds like my worst nightmare. Like someone was just like, all right, man, hey man, let's get together and jam.
Well, it is funny.
I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Well, I mean, unless it's like our own band, I kind of hate that too.
Yeah.
But I mean, I am, and it's funny because I think it's almost like a subconscious sort of part of my brain that clicks on when that happens because I am like you, especially when we're together writing lyrics and stuff. It's very sort of like not by the book. I don't know if that's the right way. It's very sort of methodical and like laid out. But then I am really big into, you know, and I've played at a lot of churches and stuff like that. And so I'm pretty good at improvisation. Like it's like a portion of my brain clicks on and I just get into this sort of flow state, which is pretty amazing. And we would also do that whenever it was we're playing live. I think you're discounting yourself in that a little bit too because I think for you it takes a longer time to get there.
Well, and it just depends on like the setting. Like my mind is open and I'm sort of like available to that kind of thing when under certain circumstances. And there's other times where it's like, I don't want to do that. That's not how I operate.
Well, I just think of Mississippi, that show.
Mississippi, dude. Also Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
When we showed up and the guy was like, all right, man, so here's how we're going to do it. Usually we have, because we're like, okay, who's the opening act? And they're like, huh? No. What we do is you have 2 1-hour sets. And we're like, huh? And so we just divided up the set list and then, you know, oh God, it's just, I thought it was awesome.
It was awesome.
Boy, it took a couple drink tickets to make it awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, dude, we got to get back on track here about how he kind of discovered this. So going back to Joseph Matheny, he had this buddy, Bob, who, as we know, allegedly helped with the development of the Metaphase typewriter, okay? Joseph Matheny's hanging out over at Bob's place, and Bob says, hey, man, you ever seen these? And he kind of like shows Joseph Matheny this like, I don't know, like these Xerox papers that are just like stapled together or whatever
Mm-hmm.
from his bag. He's like,
Yeah.
huh? Matheny kind of picks these up and takes a look at them. And he's like, no, I've never seen them. And he says that at first glance, it just kind of looked like a science catalog. And as he's kind of like looking through these, he actually like is like, dude, I've got actually a lot of these books that this thing lists.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, like, they hung out for a while before Bob left. Matheny was like, hey man, do you mind if I hold on to this for a little bit? And Bob was like, no man, it seems like it's right up your alley anyway, whatever. And then, that was that.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Matheny says he didn't really even think about it much over the next couple of days, but a few days later, he kind of decided to kind of take a deeper look. And that's when he discovered that there's this strange thing, and we've got a picture of the cover of this catalog that he references all throughout this mystery, and kind of what kicked it off and kind of made him aware of the Ong's Hat potential gateway to another dimension. And this company is called like Incunabula.
Yep.
Incunabula.
Boy, that word never gets easy.
Incunabula. Yeah, it's a strange thing, but it says on this first thing, and it just says that this catalog, Incunabula, a catalog of rare books, manuscripts, and curiosa, conspiracy theory, frontier science, and alternative worlds, Emery Cranston.
Yeah.
And like I said before, there is a 27-book list, and within that list that we're going to go, again, in deeper detail about over on the Patreon, there's some really, really interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially how Joseph Matheny got involved in all of this. Like Tyler kind of mentioned, I think at some point, this Nick Herbert character, who was also the quantum typewriter, definitely on that project, had written a couple books. He was a physicist as well. Some of his books are actually listed.
Yeah.
And there's even like this full interview that Joseph Matheny kind of did where he asks Nick Herbert about all kinds of stuff, everything from, background to alternate dimensions, that this book written by Herbert.
And Herbert was like a badass physicist, and I think he was like one of the founders of like a lot of this stuff, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he would have been, I think it's important to say that he was born in like the 30s, so he would have been older. Matheny would have really looked up to this guy.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure. Like he was a big name.
Yeah.
And they talk about everything from, and here's the thing, this book that I'm kind of referencing, all this is called Ong's Hat, the beginning, an authorized version by Joseph Matheny. And it has that interview. And our patrons will, of course, enjoy being able to thumb through this book as well. We're going to put pieces of this up there. Interviews with Nick Herbert, and things get like really in depth about all kinds of stuff. Like ultimately, though, Joseph Matheny later appeared on Coast to Coast. He was all over internet forums and chat pages. And as the internet evolved, folks, this is a mystery that, still to this day is discussed on places like Reddit and 2chain and all these places.
God, I love that. I hate it at the same time.
So, he allegedly, kind of stopped everything that he was doing. He became like an investigative, not reporter necessarily, but he was really kind of trying to figure all this stuff out. People were trying to figure out, where is this gateway in Ong's Hat?
Right.
People flocked to the Pine Barrens trying to find it. Ultimately, almost in like a scavenger hunt-like way for everybody in the online community, trying to piece together all these clues, these locations, these theories, these mysteries, all built within like I said, real books that are on this list, real concepts in science, and then it kind of gets into that fringe science stuff. At the end of the day, this is one of those mysteries that doesn't really have a definitive conclusion, so to speak. Right. But when we come back from this break, we're going to kind of talk about information that has come to light since this urban legend began.
We'll return after these messages.
Pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. I think it's important for us to kind of explore a little bit of Joseph Matheny's upbringing and stuff. Now, some of this stuff, Ty, I don't know if you know this, but it's pretty cool. So Matheny, while he was growing up, he spent a lot of summers with his grandfather, who was the owner of a 3-ring circus. He grew up around people who were like amazing storytellers. He like explains like and describes like his grandfather being just somebody that was almost magnetic, you know? We've all been around those kind of people. I'm not trying to
Okay.
You know, I'm not trying to point any fingers, but we've all been around those people that are just excellent at storytelling. You know, like they can turn a potential like silly, boring situation into like one where people are like laughing and having a good time. And so for the most part, you know, I think subconsciously we're all kind of drawn to that type of character. And that's kind of like what his grandfather was. And so
kind of like the bard.
Kind of like the bard.
In D&D, yeah. Although I would say, Woody, I think you have always kind of represented that with me. Like I can tell a good story, but there's going to be 5 extra pages of rambling.
Tons of ums.
Yeah, that could have just been taken out.
Well, I appreciate that, man.
You're welcome, pal.
He, from a very young age, was inspired by this. He's inspired by the circus, the performance of it all, the ability to invoke emotion from the audience, whether that's excitement or fear or, you know, disgust or laughter, whatever it is.
Yeah.
He was inspired by that. He was inspired by his grandfather just being great at just like, you know, telling a story and spinning yarns and like creating like a world for someone to live in within their own head. And interestingly enough, whenever he was younger, he was like a major in cinematography during the early 80s. And this is another one of those situations where it's kind of hard for people to kind of remember, myself included, because we've all got the equipment for an excellent movie, essentially.
Yeah.
Right in our pocket every day.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like we're carrying these video cameras that are so much better than the ones that we used to use on tour, man, when we were like, we need to make a tour diary.
Oh, yeah.
You go back and look at that footage, it's like, good Lord, man, that's god-awful,
yeah,
you know?
For sure.
And now we just have that at the ready. Well, back then it wasn't like that, right? And so Joseph Matheny's desire to, you know, reach a broad audience with like storytelling and all this kind of stuff, when he started to realize that there was a potential global platform, such as the internet, a place where you could reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people and deliver a story to them a lot easier than you could, you know, because you got to think back then too. There was no such thing as like Instagram Reels or TikTok, right? Like now we live in a world where everybody's a creator because they can lean their phone down and do a dance.
Yeah.
And that makes them creative.
Yeah.
And that's not a judgmental statement.
Yes, it is.
And back then, it wasn't the case. If you wanted a bunch of attention and someone to hear your song, watch your movie, there were a lot of steps involved, and there were a lot of gatekeepers involved, right? Well,
and you have to just be willing to just bust your and get out there and work
and put it in, and then hear the word no a lot, right? Rejection is a that comes with the entertainment. Well, as the home computing revolution began to kind of just kick off in the late 80s, he really thought, wow, this is interesting, right? Now I've got people who have access to stories and stuff, and this kind of ignited his imagination even more. And he started to plan a story that he could incorporate within this internet age. This guy is kind of like what Tyler and I have referred to before, which is like this generation that's, in my opinion, got a large advantage over a lot of generations because we have one foot in the analog age and one foot in the digital age. And if you can learn how to like utilize both, then, you know, kind of the world's your oyster, or in Ong's case, your hat.
Nice. There it is.
So he began to plan this story and had heard about this area of Ong's hat before. You know, everything from, again, this is a town that has like a mysterious origin. Just around the name is a situation where, you know, it was kind of close to some serious historical events. There was a weapons-grade plutonium leak there. Yeah. Even in an interview that I found, he kind of talks about how like the locals, you just pick any local and there are just a bunch of like folklore and legends. Just we mentioned it earlier, the Jersey Devils from this area, right?
Oh yeah.
And so utilizing this area, he began to take bits and pieces of legend, lore, and pieces of reality, book titles, names, true concepts, real philosophy, real pseudoscience, physics, quantum physics, all of these things, and began to create what would become, allegedly, well, I know Tyler's going to come in later about this, but allegedly, maybe one of the very first augmented reality games in history.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those folks that don't know, an augmented reality game, or ARG as it's typically sort of phrased, is kind of a way of, it's this sort of very well thought out game or sort of delivery sort of approach of media where it kind of keeps an anchor in the real world. So it feels like there's sort of a narrative or a game. What's funny is I think in a way, to sort of make this easy to understand, is for all you folks that originally saw the Blair Witch Project in the theaters. So before that movie came out, and I'm included in this, we all thought that the movie was real. In that first week when it came out, we all thought, this is truly found footage. It's in the real world. It's something that actually happened, and they just happened to find this footage. And it was terrifying. It really made it just really, really intriguing and fascinating, because it's like, it has a foot in the real world, you know?
And they almost like preemptively in their marketing technique planted little like clues here and there, missing posters that they would just plaster around towns, you know, like fake news reporting about these people that were missing. So by the time, you know, you're getting to you're like, this is a real found footage thing.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And so whatever I say ARG, I don't exactly mean, like, I guess as we've moved forward, it's kind of now more associated with like video games. You know, there's a lot of these things that are, you know, tied to actual like video games, which is cool. But this is sort of more like a more like old school kind of approach. So like,
to me, it's even more like, I mean, because it's so like hands-on and like real, like that's true augmented, you know? Like, I mean, it's not just like I'm looking through my phone and, oh man, there's a, you know, a dinosaur in my living room. This is like, because he's using elements of stories that have already existed.
Right.
And elements of reality and true places and all this stuff, he was able to kind of create this, you know, Easter egg type hunt for facts and knowledge, and like, and then by injecting that into a community that is already, in this instance, I'll use open-minded enough to kind of be open to those kind of things, I would say like statistically more likely to kind of like just buy in and dive in head first.
Right.
Man, I mean, he kind of like, it's that lightning strikes moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note, not only was he the first one of these, but he was also, you know, and this is long before like the internet even came, even early Usenet, you know, version of internet. You know, he was, I just imagine this dude, you know, at Kinko's you know, in the middle of the night, because, you know, they used to be 24 hours and like just print after print after print, you know, to make these pamphlets and these flyers to like paste all over the place. And it kind of got a following, you know, long before, you know, the sort of the internet was introduced. And like, this is something that kind of reminds me of, you know, in more mainstream media, I would say like geocaching, or like even like Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
It's that like, it's sort of like that sort of treasure hunt kind of thing. So there's that part of it that it creates that sort of addiction to like, oh, we got to know more. We got to do this. And there's other groups or other sort of ARGs more recently that I think are so great, because they really do play into that, like we said at the top, like that early internet or pre-internet, you know, zine culture, that whole kind of thing. You may know some of these, like the Jejune Institute, the Happy Valley Dream Survey, or the Willamette Dream Survey. They're these really sort of obscure things, and they're utilizing like flyers and all that stuff. And you know, there will be like real telephone numbers, and you call the number, and then it leads you to this other thing. And I think they're amazing.
Yeah, and we're like, I think potentially some folks listening now may just be like pissed at the discovery of like all of this was just allegedly the creation of, well, I mean, there's no other way to put like a brilliant mind, because even just like what you just said, where, there's clues that you discover, there's an actual like phone number that you call, and someone, all of that thinking ahead, man, is just incredible.
Yeah,
and it's just like next level creativity, and it's just really cool. Cool in the sense of like, as long as nobody's getting hurt, kind of thing, right?
Right.
Things start to get kind of interesting. So like, he does explain in this book like all of the different cool ways that he did this, and this. To just kind of sum it all up, he essentially collaborated with other folks and would do these like interviews. He would digitize the interviews and print them out in a catalog that was mailed out to people. Now, in this interview that I heard, he actually describes like, I mean, he did everything, like the steps that this guy took is just incredible. He would find this list of people that would be, interested in this kind of stuff. The producers over at Coast to Coast, the this, the that. And he would mail them these catalogs and this information, but he would first mail it to and I'd never even heard of this, what's called a remailer. And in this instance, it was a remailer business in Hong Kong, and basically they just remail all of those letters in bulk using their mailing address.
Yeah.
And so like all of a sudden you're at your mailbox, you open it, you got this weird envelope from Hong Kong. You're like, what the heck? You open it up, and it's this strange pamphlet. And at the top of the show, that's what I was reading from. That's what's in that pamphlet. And like one of the last things that you would read is something that kind of sounds not threatening necessarily, but certainly kind of scary. And, and I'll redo it here. It says, in any case, we know something about you, your interests, deeds, and desires, works, and days, and we know your address. Otherwise, you would not be reading this brochure. And so, like, there's just this, like, insane amount of, like, whoa, this is crazy. And so, like, by the time all of these sort of seeds were planted, I think what he found out relatively quickly, and I say relatively quickly because, I mean, this lasted for years and years and years, and I think part of the reason he began to kind of step away from it was somewhat after his appearance on Coast to Coast. He started, like, people were showing up at his doorstep. He noticed that on the forums, people were taking things to, like, another level. Like, the forums became less pleasant. People started getting nasty, taking it too seriously. Rumors emerged that people were getting sick just by researching the story.
It just reminds me of like Twitter. I hate Twitter so much.
Right.
And it's just like,
and we're going to talk about that in just a second.
Yeah.
Somebody like figured out his address and came to, they just were like outside of his window at his home, and he had to escort this individual off the property at gunpoint, dude.
Wow. And
at that point, he's like, this is wild. So he made this like public statement. He released this book that basically explained it all and showed that, like, hey, look, this was I don't even know if you want to call it a thought experiment. This was just fun,
Right.
And he realizes, I've heard this interview too, he takes full responsibility of people getting mad about it and all that. People would even on these forums claim that they like have intercepted his like emails, or that they're going to make them public, and secrets that they believed he was holding on to, and they would even call his like workplaces, dude, and say like, listen, you can't trust this guy. He's in, just harassment. Seriously.
And I think too, it's kind of that thing that goes along with being the first at something,
Right.
I think nowadays, if this came along, it would be, not that it would be taken less serious, but I think the repercussions that he faced wouldn't be nearly as like intense or severe. People showing up at your house and all that stuff, because nobody knew at this point. And I'm still a little, as far as it being true or completely fake. But if we are regarding it as completely fake, and I don't mean like fake. I mean, if it's like a game, this sort of folklore and sort of anthropology that he's created, you just imagine just how furious these people would be, because they're thinking it's so serious, and they're just like researching, and just like every waking moment is like, how can I figure out more about these like this Chaos Institute and like stuff like that. And then you find out like, oh, it was just a game. It kind of just goes with it, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. One of the things, that I think would potentially put it kind of like any doubts of whether or not he actually just created this or whatever, something that he said was like, look, in the original sort of CD-ROM, there was like a CD-ROM that he started sending out rather than like the paper publications, I guess. And within that, no kidding.
Jeez, what I wouldn't give, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a place to play a CD-ROM.
Yeah, that's true.
But
I think I have an external drive somewhere, but God knows if it works, man. I have no idea.
Yeah.
He's produced a CD-ROM with all the material used as the basis for the game, which he had documented, called Secret Doc, explaining what it was in like the fine print, essentially. And, people kind of still ignored it. Now, again, this is from an interview. Who knows? We can't find that. I don't have that CD-ROM. I can't verify that. But, reading through the book and stuff, I would kind of let everybody else sort of decide. But, here's what's all kind of, well, I'll say this. Something that you said earlier, and kind of getting back to that as we kind of begin to wrap this up, is the power that this kind of has. We live in a day and age where to be able to, I think, do something like the gatekeeper stuff is even easier now. I mean, I'm sorry, like there's less of a gatekeeper in any of these platforms that would prevent anybody from just like making up something that could be harmful, or just making something up and then everyone just latches onto it, and then it's just like, you and I talked about this on the phone a couple of days ago, and it's like, dude, even something stupid like a reality TV star front page, like whatever, when a publication comes back to like issue an apology or retract their statement, that's not a first page story. That's buried deep within the pages. Yeah. Because there's a new front page story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like, unfortunately, that's sort of like the scary thing about it all, that you could create something like this. It takes a life of its own, which it sounds like that kind of happened with him. He was just like, man, it just kind of took a life of its own. It became so big and so difficult that like I couldn't steer it away from the direction it was going, really, without trying to just, I mean,
it's kind of like Fight Club, really. Like, he started the...
you mean Project Mayhem?
Yeah, it's a lot like that, where, this thing was created, and then, more members joined and more allegiance to it,
it like surpasses the allegiance to the idea surpasses their allegiance to the founder.
The creator, yeah.
Right. And that's when it becomes like scary as heck. I think that happens, arguably I think that happens all the time. Things kind of just like get away from it. I think any sort of like big group organization, that kind of stuff can happen sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think of, you think of like QAnon, and I have mixed opinions on this, because there is a validity to a lot of the things that would happen, that were sort of predicted. But, because of that, like, regardless whether you look at it as like a good thing, a bad thing, I think we all can agree that it was this thing that started small and then it just sort of took over. Now, again, I think there's a lot of good that came from it, especially, now we know about a lot of the human trafficking and sex trafficking stuff. We know about a lot of that stuff because of QAnon. Now, again, this could be a total psyop and total BS. I actually have a theory that, and I'm not driving away from the doc just yet, but I actually have a theory that the QAnon thing, while I believe that there are real people, real physical people that were sort of tied into its beginnings, I think the actual QAnon itself is maybe an early form of like a chat GPT, like AI.
Like early iteration of AI.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And if you look at it that way, it's even more interesting because maybe it was able to predict these things because it was able to pull from all of the internet to see certain like patterns in its algorithm. And I mean, it could be really fascinating. But anyway, all that to say is like that's sort of a modern look at how, like, good or bad, something sort of took on a life of itself and just sort of became bigger than maybe its intention,
Right.
I will say this. I think for me, I love this story so much. I think the coolest part for me is the guy, like Joseph Matheny. I think he, and it's hard to sort of put into words, but as we sort of researched and sort of read more about him, he sort of represents this character, this type of guy that you don't really see anymore. He's a guy, and I've known several of these guys throughout my lifetime that were, maybe one or two generations before us, or maybe the same generation as you, but it's this guy that would have been in their 20s in like the early 80s, or maybe even like mid 80s, whereas like we were really young in the beginning of the 80s. So it's this super intellectual guy. He's tied into, we talked about this on the phone. I think you said that he's the guy who, instead of going to the party, he's going to like hang out with his friends and they're going to just like totally nerd out over this new book on like quantum physics
right.
And it was this sort of carrying the mantle of these, pseudo intellectuals like the beat poets, like, the early like French, philosophers and stuff. It's like where these guys would sort of sit around and sort of throw out these ideas and bounce ideas off each other to come up with these pretty brilliant ideas. And I think you don't really see that anymore. And what's interesting about it is I ran across some information where he actually was a Discordian. He was into Discordianism, and that may sound familiar because our episode on the Illuminati card game, Steve Jackson, the creator, he was a Discordian.
That Would Be Rad, Season 3, Episode 9, Illuminati, the Game of Conspiracy.
And what's interesting and serendipitous and synchronistic to today is actually he's really big into Discordianism. And so on May Day, today, in 1980, he would found the Order of the Illuminati Scordians, which was this sort of sect of Discordianism. And I just thought that was really, really
it is really
cool. And the cool thing too is that like Discordianism as a whole is sort of, it's just this character. It's like this like sort of trickster sort of archetype, like it's sort of looked at as like a religion, but even if you're serious about it, it's sort of still done with sort of like a wink and a nod kind of, and looked at, as sort of like a satirical religion. I mean, even, it was founded at, they sort of worship the goddess of strife and discord, and which, basically, or chaos. And so it's this idea that like everything is sort of tongue in cheek. It's like, oh, well, this is real. So if you look at that and look at like, oh, well, he was into like Discordianism, this sort of like chaos thing, everything is kind of like not necessarily like a joke, but there is an element that I would, like Robert Anton Wilson and like those guys, it does sort of lean into it being a big thing where like, hey, we're these super highly intellectual folks, and we know a lot more than all of, you people below us. And so, and I'm not saying that in like necessarily a bad way, but it's like, we know all these things because we've studied all these things. And so we can lay these things out as like pure fact. And we know that it's going to trick 99% of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what was cool too is I looked into, it reminded me whenever I discovered that he was a Discordian like Steve Jackson from the Illuminati card game. There's also this thing called the Church of the Subgenius, which is also kind of this sort of like parody religion. And, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, the whole thing, it was created in the 70s, and it was always sort of a joke. I mean, the whole thing was kind of about this guy named J.R. Dobbs, which, oddly enough, he goes by the name Bob, which is also the Bob. There's also a Bob who was Joseph Matheny's friend who only would go by the name Bob in that story. So I find that really sort of, I mean, maybe there could be something there. Who's basically this dude in the 50s who was repairing a television set in the 50s. And he was basically this whole message from this God called Jehovah One, basically delivered this message to him. And so it's this whole kind of thing. But if you look a little further into it, the most interesting thing about like the Church of the Subgenius is when you look at the members. And again, like these are all these guys that don't really exist anymore, but they're these guys that they're all kind of in that same thing. So we have like one of the bigger proponents is Mark Mothersbaugh, or he was one of the founding members of Devo. Paul Rubens, who was Pee Wee Herman. You have David Byrne from the Talking Heads. You have Robert Crumb, who is like one of my favorite comic artists and cartoonists. And what was cool too is like, so Crumb sort of made the Church of the Subgenius known even more because like, he was really big into like early counterculture comics in the early 80s and 70s. But he published the Subgenius pamphlet in his comics anthology Weirdo. And it's cool because a lot of these members of this church are also kind of known now as being collaborative partners to Ong's Hat. And so it's this sort of like circle. It's like all these, it's like I started down this rabbit trail of like, oh, well, man, this guy sounds a lot like this, or he sounds a lot like he would be into this Church of the Subgenius. And then once I got to it, I find that like,
come to find out, boom.
Oh, they're all tied together, Yeah. So I think that's really cool. And I think that guy, that all these dudes that I listed, it's like that's the guy that is, it's all done with like a wink and a nod. I mean, even you look at like Devo and Pee-wee's Playhouse and Pee-wee, it's like, it's always like, even if it comes across as like silly, it's still totally brilliant and totally sort of, that they know something that you don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure, man. And like, I don't know. I think like the way it all kind of wraps up to...
We will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
for better or for worse here, this was one of the most fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It was the groundbreaking mystery that I think still captivates. I mean, something that you said too, it's like still hard to believe in a way that it was made up.
Yeah.
Because of how well it was planned, you know? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
He like operates, I think, at a level, we kind of talked about this the other day on the phone too. You kind of feel like these folks are operating at a level where they have like a greater understanding of, you know, their target audience, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And it's like even Pee-wee's Playhouse, or the fact that like, you know, so it's like the Devo guy, the Talking Heads guy, Pee-wee Herman, they kind of all, and I mean, Crumb, they're all that sort of same kind of like character in a way.
Yeah,
like,
it's that trickster kind of.
They share some characteristics that are like, oh, okay, similar personality types for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so interesting to me. And I think a lot of folks, you know, it caused a lot of animosity towards this guy. I mean, truly, I think it's brilliant. Again, hopefully no one, I guess the danger is when you can kind of become, when humans and humanity can become obsessed with a single concept. I think, unfortunately, one of the outcomes, maybe even unintentional outcomes, is that there's some like destruction left in the wake of that, you know? Because if one person thinks their version of any story is the only right one, you know, it can get a little crusty.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely gets a little kind of dangerous a little bit. Yeah. I think that, and I mean, I guess we've sort of, you know, we're reaching the end, and I think my beliefs on this are, you know, once I found out that and did a little digging and find out that he's into Discordianism and into, you know, he's in these circles of these similar guys. I think it made it a lot easier to go down than it was totally like a genius level, tongue-in-cheek sort of trolling and, you know, earliest form of an ARG. And I think it's genius. However, there's still like maybe 2% of me that believes that maybe not all of it, but I think maybe some things could have been pulled from reality. You know, like I said, like, or, you know, maybe later in that time, you know, you're going to have, you know, Project Stargate and remote viewing and, you know, Project Montauk. And like, so we know that this stuff is going on, and so I wonder if some of that was, you know, pulled from like, maybe he did discover some things that were sort of real. Maybe there was an ashram where these scientists were doing stuff. I don't know. I think
the interesting thing about this entire thing, when you dig down to the very first instant of like conception here, is this list of books, right? The theory is all of these things, all of these clues were inserted into publicly printed material,
right,
for the most part, right?
Right.
Pieces of truth that were in there to kind of begin to ease, you know, people's conception of a lot of these topics. And to me, ultimately, it's interesting that, yes, he's saying like, oh, well, I made it all up and stuff, and here's how. But at the end of the day, he's kind of doing the same thing, potentially.
Exactly.
Right? And so it's just like it's big sort of like loop and circle of creating these concepts and getting them out into the ether.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it on other shows, and again, we're a little long in the tooth here, but that power that someone that has the ability to create something that others will see, consume in some way, read, look at, listen to, you know, it's kind of a responsibility. With great power,
there it is,
comes great responsibility.
I love it.
Yeah. So, well, it's cool. So.
I need to just say one more thing. And this is, you know, this is where we're going to kind of go off the rails a little bit. I think there's also, I'm of the belief, and, you know, we get pretty deep on this show. I mean, like we kind of always say, like the folks that are here for like 80s movies and John Hughes analysis, a lot of this is probably going to grate on their nerves a little bit, but this idea of like thought forms and tulpas and like that sort of high strangeness, metaphysics. I think there is something to this though, and and the reason why I say this is for the nuts and bolts guy who's only going to go by the facts. It's like, okay, this dude was a giant troll. He created this game, and a lot of dumb people fell for it. Or is there more to it? And so I say that because when I found out that Joseph Matheny, was the same kind of guy as like Steve Jackson. They're both from the Illuminati card game. A lot of the reason we brought up the Illuminati card game is there's a lot of stuff on there that it's like, how could these people know this? How would they know to make a card that's going to show something crashing into the side of the World Trade Center? And it's just like, it's that idea that like, okay, well, maybe several things are at play. Maybe it was completely, just randomly predicted. Maybe the artist was like, hey, these are two, pretty pivotal points of New York or American architecture, and we'll just use that. Or was it put into place, and so they did this, and so much intention was put into this thing that it maybe caused it to happen? Or it's just that idea of like so much intention, and it's like, it goes back, and that's why I brought up like chaos theory and chaos magic. It's that idea of like, hey, we're gonna manifest these things into reality. And so for the Illuminati card game, it was we're gonna make this thing, and we're gonna put it in front of as many eyes as possible. And so all these eyes that are seeing this are now also looking at this and putting intention into this. And so is it sort of creating its own egregore and like bringing it into existence? So like with Ong's hat, like, did this stuff, like, was he aware of that? Was this part of like some sort of like maybe chaos magic kind of almost like a ritual, not in the sense of like, oh, we're standing around with like doing incantations and spells and stuff, but I mean, was it actual ritual in the sense of like, like I said, like Grant Morrison, or using like modern techniques of, hey, we're gonna create this thing, we're gonna put it in front of a ton of people, especially.
His idea was to create, and I forgot to mention this, but this falls perfectly into what you're talking about. His idea was to create this thing, this concept that he had that he considered like a living book.
Right, exactly.
Right, so you're like you're like bringing life to something that would typically just be inanimate,
Right.
But because other people are adding to it, creating this community, this living, breathing thing, and then he also refers to it as the meta machine.
Oh wow!
And that's interesting because, like,
I haven't heard that.
In
That's
a sense,
cool.
No matter how you kind of look, like, a couple of things. Number one, I don't think you need to be a practitioner or even interested in fringe science to like understand the concept of. And we talked about this every time we talk about tulpas and egregores and stuff. You hear in the business world the power of positive thinking.
Oh yeah,
the affirmations, the secret.
Yeah.
All that stuff is relatively available to you, even if you're not like someone that likes this kind of stuff. So that'll soften the edge a little bit there.
Yeah,
but
right.
this idea of this living book and this meta machine, and like truly, it's not a biological organism, but it is something that is alive and changing and evolving and always there. I mean, once the concept is born, so to speak, it's there. Ong's hat, the legend, this is alive. It lives. We're still talking about it 20 years later.
That's what I was going to say. Even us being into this, us making this episode, you guys finding out about it, if you haven't already, closed up shop and turned off the episode, you guys are probably into it, and we'll probably do more research into it as well. And like, that is that sort of, ever evolving, living thing, and it's fascinating. I mean,
and I know a lot of these concepts, some of you guys listening to this out there, some of the concepts are like potentially high level and kind of go over your head and you're just like, I don't really care, right?
Yeah.
If you think this was deep, we didn't even talk about quantum mechanics, Syncro-Shamanism, otherworld theory, or otherworld, many worlds hypothesis, or whatever, travel cults, all kinds of stuff that we didn't even touch the surface. I mean,
we tried to keep it light.
The surface on it. Yeah, it's interesting, man. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it is fascinating that something like this can go from a concept to almost take on an uncontrollable life of its own.
Yeah.
And then understanding, I think now as a person in this world where that is just constantly becoming easier and easier to do, sort of understanding your role in all this and your responsibility truly to kind of, not necessarily create something that could cause someone harm. I mean, well, I think what I was going to say kind of lastly, man, is back in the 80s and early 90s when Joseph Matheny kind of created this, I would say the pace of how quickly things could get chaotic, or introduce chaos into whatever it is that he's introducing it into the world, into the ether, whatever, that sort of pace. I think I used this analogy yesterday when we were talking about this. Imagine like information, the delivery of information being like a very slow moving river in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
To where now it's just like almost instantaneous,
Oh, 100%.
And if you put something into that stream, you got to be careful because like it's going to get away from you very quickly. You're not going to be able to change its course or take it back. It's already gone.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yep.
And so back then it was less dangerous, but I think as it started to unfold and he started to kind of realize this, and like so much of his life was probably taken up because, by the way, he also created this like website for everybody so that, it still exists today actually.
Yeah. It's cool.
And it kind of catalogs all of the information and all of the things that exist and all that so that people could have like a centralized location. He could essentially at that point too sort of control the narrative rather than it just being everywhere,
But also, I mean, and I think you mentioned this before, is that part of the trolling? Is this whole idea of, and I'm not saying either way. I think it's incredibly interesting either way you take it. But is him just saying, "Oh, it was all fake," and much like our last Patreon episode, where is that going to be out yet? By the way, that's already out.
Yeah.
I think, and like our last Patreon episode, when you have this guy coming out and saying, "Oh, I interviewed Mike from," that would have been the original guy who. Or we think Mike, who would eventually become Milo,
website or whatever.
In the Lake City Quiet Pills. It's. I think all that is just one of those sort of occurrences where you have a guy who, hindsight is 20/20, and it's easy to sort of reverse engineer, like, oh, well, that wasn't real. It was this, and just sort of make up these things. So, is the whole, him sort of explaining it away? Is that part of the trolling?
Misdirect or something?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe. The only thing that keeps me from thinking that is this. If somebody really discovered that technology, and this guy made it extremely public and wouldn't necessarily be impossible to find by some large 3-letter agency or anything like that, this sucker would have been dead as a doornail. Man.
Well, no. That's where that 2% of my belief that there's maybe more to it comes from. I think, how do we know that he wasn't approached? I mean, because these are topics that our government has spent trillions and trillions of dollars on. This kind of, avant-garde, like fringe sci phenomenon sort of research. So how do we know that he wasn't contacted by these 3-letter agencies and then
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you redact all this stuff, or you come out and say it was all a game, or else, you know.
Yeah.
And I think there
I just
could
feel
be,
like it'd be easier for them just to kill him.
yeah, but I mean, you know, why would you do that when you can just have like the creator of all this stuff come out himself and say, oh, it's all fake?
Yeah, that's probably true.
Like, you're going to get more out of that. I mean, because think about it. If you have these like hardcore conspiracy theorists, which I mean, I'm a conspiracy theorist.
If he died, it's like it almost proves that it's real.
Oh, he would be canonized as like
a martyr. Yeah.
And so it would be way worse. So I don't know. I think there could be something to that. Regardless, I think what we really learned in this episode is that Joseph Matheny is a high-level, incredibly intelligent dude who, long before the internet came along and made it convenient to quote-unquote go viral, he was a guy who, you know, he's a man out of time who lived in a time where you had to put in massive amounts of work to make these things happen. And I think, if nothing else, if it's fake, if it's real, however much of it has, you know, validity to it, I think what we all can land on is that he put in a massive amount of work, and it has paid off.
For free, dude.
For free.
Yeah, like, I don't think it's paid off for him financially. Right?
Oh,
I mean,
no.
He did all of this work for just the entertainment aspect. And to me, like, that's, and not, like, I was going to say this, another thing that I think we can glean from this is potentially at this level of just work and like planting all these seeds, like, might go down in history as like one of the best storytellers of all time.
Right. I think he's in league with folks like Andrew WK, with our you know, geniuses from the Mayday mystery. You know, I think these are all, you know, these high level icons in this sort of this whole. I mean,
it's like a game of chess, man.
It's like performance art, maybe a little too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But like being able to know, hey, if this happens, then that, and then I'm going to plant this there just in case, and then like putting that all together, being able to somewhat predict in the chaos that it's going to ensue.
Yeah.
Some potential outcomes and being ready for them all. I mean, that's just, it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, and also you have to, like, I didn't even think about this until now, but it's like, you know, the Andrew WK thing, I wonder if he was inspired by the Ong's hat thing, because if you think of his like vision journal or vision, what was it called? Was it Vision Journal or Vision Diary? I can't remember. But like the book that was supposedly like, you know, quote unquote, like found.
Yeah.
That Would Be Rad. Season 2, Episode 4, The Andrew WK Conspiracy.
I mean, that's basically the same thing as this this catalog, you know, that we're going to get more into in our Patreon episode, which leads me to this.
Access granted.
Yeah, to me, this is like one of those stories that are, it's just got these, all of the right elements to make up, to make the mythology so rich, if you will. I mean, it takes place in.
I love the way you put that. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm serious. Like,
no,
I
know.
And like all the, it's like this. Joseph Matheny would be the ultimate dungeon master for Dungeons and Dragons, because he'd be able to create a world that is just like you said, so rich and believable.
Yeah.
That you feel immediately immersed in it. You know.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I consider myself sort of an abstract thinker. I think things are interesting that are kind of like taken from left field. So you have this idea of, you know, there being like an ashram in the middle of the Pine Barrens, where, you know, if you know anything about cryptozoology, the Pine Barrens are where the Jersey Devil lives. And so you already have this sort of mythology in this place, and now you're going to stick like basically an Indian, you know, ashram in the middle of it. And so it gets into like that, and like there's like a high like kind of like sort of counterculture sort of aspect to it, which is cool. And then, and just, you know, like we said at the top, it's like you tie that in with like this, you know, our fondness with like Xerox copies of like, you know, these like, you know, stapled to like power poles and like that. I don't know. There's an element of that's just so intriguing to me from the 80s, you know?
Yeah, man. It's still to this day, this is one of my favorite episodes that we've done, one of my favorite stories to uncover and to dive deep into. And, you know, I'm just going to say it. I can't wait till we have him on, although I got to be honest with you. I'm a little nervous, man. It's kind of like,
yeah,
ooh, what if he hates us?
I mean,
he'll definitely, he'll
could
definitely hate you. He'll like me, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's probably
at least it's 56% of us.
Okay. Anyway, we've rambled enough. We appreciate you hanging out with us and being with us on this little look behind the giant steel door of our vault into these past episodes. We hope you've enjoyed the walk down memory lane and this sort of revisiting of these, some of our favorite episodes.
Yeah, and I hope you're excited about this upcoming season because, man, do we have a lot planned, and we'll see you then.
Right on. Have a good one. If this wasn't enough, if these 2 hours weren't enough and you need more rambling and more in-depth, granular information, head on over to Patreon. We have the Rabbit Trail, and there's many different tiers to suit your sort of financial, status at the moment. We have a good time. It's a little loosier. Gee, I meant to say loosey-goosier. It's just a little more relaxed. Usually it's done a little later in the night, and so it's a lot of fun, and it lets us sort of get a little more in-depth, talk about more sort of random stuff that's going on, whatever. But if that sounds interesting, head on over to Patreon. We'd love to see you. Our members of the Rabbit Trail, our best friends, we value so much. We're so grateful for. If you don't feel like doing that, you just want to drop us a line, head on over to Instagram. That's where the bulk of our social media presence is. Drop us a line in the comments. Shoot us a DM. We'd love to hear your maybe urban legends in your area. I say this every time, but I got to keep going. Tell us your, maybe some paranormal encounters that you've had. Maybe you know some things that we just totally missed about Ong's Hat. We would love to hear it. That's just, we look at this as a
living book.
As a living book. That's right. Much like Ong's Hat or the Incuna Bula.
Hakuna Matata.
It never gets easy. That word is the worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to leave us a message or write us a more long-form essay, shoot it on over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Or even better, head on over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, our website, which is sort of a one-stop shop. You can jump on to any podcatcher, listen to the show. You can leave a voicemail directly to us, telling us your paranormal story or your localized sort of urban legend. Those are the things that really keep us going, and we absolutely love us. When we absolutely love it. Anything else? Am I missing anything?
No, I was just going to say, Joseph Matheny, if you're listening.
Oh, God, yeah.
Boy, would we ever love to have you on the show.
Absolutely. And if you're friends with
And it's mainly just going to be us just praising your storytelling capabilities. I mean, truly. So
yeah, it'll literally be 2 hours of us just telling
maybe just like a little sprinkle of begging for a copy of the CD-ROM. But outside of that, we would just
or one of those original pamphlets. Also, if you're
real professional,
if you do love the show and you want to give us a gift, if you guys know where to find any of this original sort of analog material from Ong's Hat, man, that would really make our day.
Amazing.
Buy us a coffee, go buy some merch on our link tree. If you have the time, leave us a 5-star review or tell that one single weirdo friend, maybe that guy that you know who's a little older now, but he was that Joseph Matheny character back in the 80s. Hey, tell that guy about the show because he'll get it. Trust me.
Trust me.
Okay, cut that out. Anyway, I guess that's about it. You got anything else, Woody?
And that's it, man.
We love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. my favorite song on the radio that's only playing sad songs. Well, even sad songs have to come to an end. And you always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but I guess it died even before it began. And that's the way it goes, the way it goes, the way it goes, the way it You were all black clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes. The way it goes, the way it goes, the way it
Access granted.
I think we should just dive in.
Before we give it up,
He's gonna keep us from diving in.
No. Dude, you had a line yesterday that I wrote down that was so good, and I'm totally stealing it. I can't remember what it's from. I think it was from one of the catalog books or whatever. Silken white sheets of birth and death.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, no, dude. I mean, some of those, like, I do want to dive into those on the Patreon.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
me
in a
too.
way where we're just not, like, getting too conceptual. Because, I mean, like, I started thinking...
It does get a little heavy.
I started thinking about that, like, this morning. Like, I was like, my God. As I was, like, diving deeper and deeper into each one of these books.
You couldn't
and
stop.
It's like, you can't stop. And then also it's just like, now, let me tell you a little... Now, the quantum wave, the wave function...
Yeah.
Is a technique that, and it's just like, geez, man, there's got to be a way to kind of,
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, because it's just too much.
But I mean, I keep going back to like the fact of like when he would have wrote this stuff. I mean, these are like, you know, and I understand that like these sort of.
That's why I think like if we could talk to this guy, man, we would relate on a level, dude, that like,
Oh,
well,
well,
I mean,
dude,
besides
totally.
the science part, but just like the concept of creating something
Yeah,
like this
right.
in a way that isn't like, I'm just being an asshole.
Yeah.
I know what that guy's like giddy feeling must have
Right.
felt like when he saw, oh man, somebody. It's the same feeling that we had like when you'd be in a different city.
Yeah.
This is a person, you've never met them, and they're singing a song, your lyrics,
Yeah.
that you've written in an apartment. it's just like one of those surreal moments. And I mean, like, it would have been addicting for him, I bet.
Oh, 100. I mean, especially, now it's...
Which reminds me, I'm going to make a fake email account and email all those assholes that used to make fun of us for wearing, skinny jeans.
God, I got you fired up earlier, and it's still...